Howdy YouTube, Esnix here with a video for you. Now this is sort of Linux related. It's more general operating system talk here, collecting operating systems. Now that's one thing I have been doing over the years, and I wish I have some that I let go over the years that I wish I never let go. But my collection right now is, I think, pretty good. I have some duplicates, and I'll go over some of this. What got me thinking about this is an older thread on the EndeavourOS forums asking to show your oldest Linux-related gems. So I put together what was immediately available in my computer room, my study or den or whatever you call it, third bedroom. It's where I have my computer stuff set up. It's where the closet is filled with computer stuff, hardware, software. But I have some boxes of software that I just couldn't fit in the closet, so I decided to drag them all out and photograph them for this particular forum thread. So we're going to start and talk about some of these, and we'll go over collecting operating systems. I have a number of eBay listings up to go through, and just give you some tips and pointers when if you're just starting off and you're really into collecting older operating systems. You can start now, but it's actually quite expensive compared to just a few years ago when some of these were bargain prices, so you couldn't give them away because people didn't think there were any importance in preserving some of this history. We'll also take a look at some Wikipedia pages on different operating systems, because if you're just starting this journey into geekdom, operating system geekdom, then you're going to want to educate yourself on what you might be looking at. If you're of a certain age, 40 and over, you'll probably remember most of these if you were sort of tuned into computer operating systems. So let's get started. We'll just go through some of these pictures, and then we'll get on to eBay and Wikipedia. Now, I think I collected 4 pictures of 4 sets of boxed operating systems. Now, most of these, I'll go over them, but most of them are complete with everything that came with in the box sold retail. OpenLinux eDesktop was put out by Caldera. It was my first really successful attempt at installing and using day-to-day a Linux operating system. This was around 2000, maybe 99, but I think 2000. TurboLinux is one I picked up just to have a complete collection or more complete collection. I never played with it in the day. It was always one of the more expensive retail Linux offerings. And between OpenLinux and RedHat, I really had enough success that I stopped really looking at that time, around the early 2000s, pre-2004 really. Windows NT 3.1 workstation. This box is the one I'd use if I wanted to drag out an old computer and install Windows NT 351. Windows NT 351 was Microsoft's first true 32-bit up from the ground developed operating system, and it was pretty pricey in the day. I was able to get a copy of this from a friend I met at a bar who ran it, and he had a CD burner at the time, pretty rare and expensive in and of itself, and he burned me a copy. I had since collected a couple box sets of this. I have one that's still sealed, and this one is, as I said, my working copy. The box of OS2 Warp 4 is not complete. It doesn't have some of the documentation that came with Warp 4. In this box is the Warp 4 CDs, the application CDs, Warp 3 Connect Blue Spine Edition, a couple CDs of that, plus the accompanying CDs, and some boot disks, some floppies. So it's not a complete set of Warp 4. I did buy the Warp 4 Upgrade Edition when it came out back in 94, 95, I believe. And I did get the little microphone with it that is advertised here. It says no microphone. In the later part of the shipping of Warp 4, they stopped including a microphone. But the early versions they did, and I got one. I don't have it anymore. This particular headset that I'm wearing came in a box set of Xandros Linux that I purchased, and I'm still using it. This was from 2005, so microphone headset still works just fine. Lost some of its padding around this ear, but other than that, it works just fine. If we scroll on down a little bit, we have a box set of FreeBSD 4.6. This, I believe, was early 2001, 2002, probably. I tried playing around with it, but I never really got my head around FreeBSD at the time, so it just sat in the closet for years. The Solaris version 10 operating system here, I have one sealed box set, and this is the open box set. This, to me, is the most fun version of Solaris to play with. It's old enough to still include the common desktop environment as an option, as well as the then brand new GNOME-based desktop environment that they were switching to. It's also a version that does not include ZFS. ZFS came along with a later edition of 10. This is the original release in 2005. I have a box set of SUSE Linux 7.1, also from right around 2000. And I remember SUSE Linux was the first Linux I ever tried. Saw it in a bookstore box set, picked it up. I think it was version 5.2 or 5.3. Can't really remember, but I know it was 5. Version 5 point something. And that was a failure. I could barely get it installed. Half of the, all of the X setup screens were still in German. I couldn't seem to find an English setup screen, but I was able to get a working X server with the German installation screens just based on the technical choices and knowing that ja was yes and nein was no on the buttons. That was enough to get a working X server. Very little else worked on it for me. So that was in 98, I believe, and it wasn't until 2000 that Caldera's OpenLinux got me really into Linux. Here's a box set of Windows NT 4.0. Now, I had originally purchased this in an academic computer store when I worked for a university, and I was able to get it for 50 bucks. Now, I have since bought a sealed copy that's like I have, as I said, multiple copies of some of these. I have some that are sealed and duplicates, and these are the working set copies that I would actually use over the years. And I haven't played around with any of these in a long time, but I still have some old hardware that might be appropriate for some of these. And I used to do old hardware operating system install videos. That's how this channel started. It wasn't really a Linux channel, but my use and admiration for Linux sort of took over. Next on the list we have mostly Linux here. We have Caldera OpenLinux 1.3, and this is a version that, although the installer was pretty rough, I was able to get a nice, good install on vintage hardware. I picked this up on eBay, I don't remember when, several years ago now. Here's one we'll talk about when shopping for operating systems after I get through my little pictures here. This is RedHat Professional Workstation. It came out just after version 9, and it was the workstation version of RedHat Enterprise Linux. So it's really Enterprise Linux, but the installer guides you through a personal workstation setup rather than a server setup. It can do the server setup, of course, but it was more geared towards those customers who just wanted Red Hat Linux, and it's version 9 but slightly refreshed, has a slightly newer kernel, slightly newer versions of some of the software. The then wonderful Blue Curve desktop environment. It was a GNOME based desktop, but the Blue Curve theme was just gorgeous. It was very Windows XP-ish, very easy to use. I have a copy here of Windows 2000 Server. This I picked up on eBay just to play with. I was really looking for a copy of Windows 2000 Professional, but the server version was actually cheaper. I think I paid 20 bucks for this set. And it is quite a bit longer of an install than the Professional version, because it does, you can't unselect all the server bits. You can unselect some of them, but not all of them. It's a bit larger install, requires a little more memory, a little more hard drive space, but it's the Windows 2000 interface. Red Hat Linux 6.2, I remember I picked this up years ago. This was back, I picked it up after it wasn't, but after it had, its currency had passed, but several years ago. And it installs wonderfully. It's so easy to install and use on older hardware. I do have a copy of Red Hat 5.2, and that installs pretty well too. This is sort of similar in the quirkiness of the install to OpenLinux 1.3. I think they're relatively around the same time. I have a box copy of Linspire 5.0. Linspire I purchased new at the time it came out from a big box computer store, basically Fry's Electronics, I think it was. It wasn't just a computer store. They sold refrigerators and stereo systems and TVs and computers and decent electronics and parts store as well. But that's where I picked this up at. This was 2005, 2006 maybe. I have a copy of Microsoft Back Office Small Business Server. Now this is still sealed. I only have one copy of this. And I picked it up thinking I would do a video comparing it to, say, S.U.S.E Linux 7.1. It's slightly older. This is based on Windows NT Server 4. So it's really a 1996, 97 vintage. But it was the only example of a complete Microsoft package that included everything that typical Linux packages included. You got full desktop, full server, applications, all in one box. Now I believe when this was new, it sold for a few $1,000s, whereas you could pick up a copy of Linux, S.U.S.E Linux, Red Hat Linux, back in the day that would include all the functionality, but at a much lower price point, usually below $100 for the Linux equivalents. Now you had to put in a lot more time and effort and learning into the Linux. The Microsoft Small Business Server with its GUI interface based on the Windows 95 interface was a lot easier, I think, to set up. Now I do have a box copy of OS2 Warp Red Spine, and I have two copies of this, one sealed, one open. And the Red Spine edition, as opposed to the Blue Spine edition, I'll explain that. The Red Spine edition did not come with Windows 3.1 included. The Blue Spine edition did. So the Blue Spine was more expensive. The Red Spine was a little cheaper because you weren't paying for the Windows 3.1 license along with the OS2 Warp license. But that's a nice... I used OS2 Warp from about 1994 all the way up to 2000. That was my primary operating system. Now I dual booted and multi-booted through that time with various versions of Windows, Windows 98, Windows NT, and then BeOS for a little while, and then finally Linux, multi-booting OS2 Warp with Linux. And that was fun because OS2 bootloader I don't believe could boot Linux, but the Linux Lilo bootloader could boot OS2. Well, it would transfer to the OS2 bootloader, and then the OS2 bootloader would boot OS2. My playing around with operating systems led to a lot of configurations over the years. So that's just what was in my room at the time I took these photos. They're all in boxes, but I took them out for the photo shoot. So you can check this forum thread out. There's some other interesting things, and hopefully by my posting this, it was almost a dead thread. I think before me, the last post was, well, only 5 days before. Okay. So it wasn't too dead. That's probably why I saw the post. Now, let's get into collecting operating systems. Now, if you're just starting out and you see something like this, RedHat Linux 9, $127, buy it now price. Don't buy this at this price. This is barely worth $10, maybe $15, $20. 127, outrageous. Now, what I did, because I know, and if you do some reading, you'll know that RedHat Professional Workstation is a slightly updated version of RedHat 9. Now, I can pick up a copy right now of RedHat Professional Workstation. I don't want to. I already have 2 copies of it. For $16. You're getting everything that 9 has, plus a little better because software version updates have occurred. And you're paying, I don't know, you're saving $110, $111. Not bad. Good deal. You can pick up copies of S.U.S.E Linux, various releases. This just happens to be 8.1. You can see the price tag still on there. When new, $79.90. Pick that up for $29.99 right now. And they have a few copies available. Now, if you want different versions, you have to search for them. But 8.1, let's see if we can see a date here. I can't make out a date there. Well, they're mentioning 95, 98 ME XP. So it had to be after 2001, probably. Here we have a really classic version of Linux. Corel, the company that eventually bought WordPerfect and a number of other products, never really saved them, did a Linux offering. and it was very innovative for the time. You see, $45.99 was the original price, so not bad for inflation. This came out in the late 90s, and at the time it was an easy-to-use Debian-based but highly modified desktop. Corel eventually sold or turned into Xandros, the company. And I remember picking up a copy of Xandros 3. It was marketed as Surfside Linux, and it came with this headset and microphone. And I used it for a little while, but I always felt it was a little slow and bloated. It really tried to be a Windows XP clone. They provided good online updates and service that you paid for. A lot of Linux companies did that. They would sell you the box set, and then security updates were free, I believe, on many of them. But sometimes, I think Xandros did this, you had to subscribe to their online service to receive updates. Another operating system we talked about, and this is a good price. That's just a starting bid. Who knows what it's going to go to. This is OS2 Warp Connect Bluespine. As I said, and it includes Windows application support. All versions of OS2 Redspine, Bluespine included DOS support, but the Bluespine included Windows support. And I don't know if they put any pictures of that. Yeah, you can see a picture of a Windows application running right there. And as I said, I ran OS2 Warp for a good chunk of the 1990s. Now here's a product I picked up many years ago. It's been sitting in my closet for so long, and I was tempted at one point to try and sell it just to get a little extra money at some point in my life. Glad I never did. I paid a lot less than this for it. I can't remember exactly what, but Unix Ware was kind of fun, very challenging to get installed. You do need license keys. If you buy this type of media kit, you will not get very far. You do have to Google around, hunt for sort of gray market license keys floating around the net. And the license keys are complicated because some licenses will unlock the enterprise version, some will only do a demo version, some will do a workstation version without the server software. So the license determines what gets installed. Sorry if you can hear that car alarm going off there. So this is the CD-ROM Media Kit version 7.1.1. This to me is the most desirable version of Unix Ware to pick up if you find a copy. They're very hard to come by. You can find older versions of SCO OpenServer, outrageously priced. I have copies of that as well, box sets. I believe 2 box sets of OpenServer, but I only have 1 box set of Unix Ware. Unix Ware 7.1.1, as I said, to me is the most desirable version. It was the version last released before Caldera bought out SCO. So this is the last, to me, true version of Unix Ware, SCO Unix Ware. I don't think it's worth $127, plus this is GBP, so it would have to be shipped from Great Britain. Shipping might add quite a bit, approximately $30 for shipping. Excuse me. So you really have to be a collector, a serious collector in Unix to want to pay that much. That'd be like close to $160. Ouch. Here's some software that I used to have in the day, and this is my regret, one big regret in getting rid of over the years, is BeOS. If you look at the price for this collection, and these rarely ever come up. This collection is actually fantastic. It includes BeOS Release 3, Release 4, Release 4.5, and Release 5. All box sets. Well, 4 doesn't look like a box set, but it has the most important part of the box set, the boot floppy and the CD. You have books. You have preview releases. Wow. And then release 1, beta 1 of Haiku. That could still be totally sealed. It's unclear. But this collection is fantastic. $2,000 fantastic? That I don't know. That's really up to you to decide. But BeOS rarely comes up. You'd be hard-pressed to find a copy of any one of these releases on eBay at any given time. So, yeah, $2,000, that's a lot to ask. If you're a real collector, this is a great collection. Here's one that really falls outside my scope of any working knowledge. It's a version of digital Unix for the alpha architecture. Now, digital Unix was a very unique Unix in the Unix world. It was based off of OSF1, which was the open source foundation, no, not open software foundation group of companies that aligned together to sort of fight the Sun dominance in the Unix market. And they based their Unix around the Mach kernel, Mach 2 or Mach 3. I forget which was in use. Very unique. So it was a true microkernel Unix implementation. And it ran originally just on digital VAX hardware and eventually alpha hardware. If you go hunting for alpha workstation servers hardware today, you're looking at a minimum of $1,500, $2,000 easy for one that's in a restorable shape. So very expensive to start collecting this stuff. You can see this is actually a very low price tag on this version of digital Unix. I've seen them easily go for $500 and sometimes a little more. So $224 if you have alpha hardware, which is also very pricey. As I said, easily $2,000 and up for a decent alpha system these days, on eBay at least. It is an expensive proposition, but if you love the hardware and you really want to see what a microkernel Linux was all about back in the day, that's your only way to do it right now. And then we have our old Sun Microsystems. This is just a media bag of the 10.0 release. The 3.05 is the month and year of the release, and 3.05 is the first release of Solaris 10. This is the same set of software that I have in my box version, my box copy. You get all the discs in a nice plastic case. So, and that's not a bad price for this software, if you find it. This also doesn't come up that often, at least the original 3.05 release. You can find DVD releases of Solaris 10 dated sometime probably 07, 08. Those may be more desirable to some people because those releases will include ZFS as a file system option. The 05, as I said, still uses the standard Unix file system of the day. Before you go purchasing, I would highly recommend you do some research. And Wikipedia is a great place to start. You can read up on the history of the operating systems. You can see what versions may or may not support any vintage hardware you do have. Very handy before you go buying. So RedHat, SUSE Linux, Corel Linux, Xandros, OS2, Unix Ware. There's a great CDE desktop environment. This looks so cool to me back in the mid-90s. Read up on BeOS. Read up on True 64 Linux. This is what Digital Linux became after Compaq bought them out. Compaq did buy Digital back in the 90s, I believe. And Compaq Linux became, well, was born from Digital Linux. As I said, originally DEC OSF1 AXP. So, Oracle now owns Solaris, but you can read up on the history of Solaris, find out the different versions. Yeah, not development, release, version history. You can look at the version history of Solaris. If you have really older SPARC hardware or older x86 hardware, Solaris did start releasing x86 versions as early, I think, as 2.2, 2.3. No, a 2.4. But that, from what I've read in the past, was extremely buggy. 2.51 was the first really solid release for x86, and it just got better after that. I've installed version 9 on x86 hardware. I've installed, well, I have version 8. I haven't gotten around to installing it yet on x86. I don't think I have anything old enough right now. Oh no, I do. Very good. You can see the support lengths are staggering compared to most operating systems. 10 years of support minimum usually. Version 10 had the most activity during its lifespan. As I said, ZFS, okay, didn't come in, it's earlier than I thought, 2006. So, mid-2006. And you can see their release versioning here is month-year coded. After 11, it gets kind of tricky because that's Oracle came around and they closed the source code. Sun opened the source code back in the 10 days, so it was briefly open source. Last in line, we get to Microsoft Windows. And I have my own, well, its own Firefox window just for Windows collecting. But read up on Windows if you don't know the history. And then go over and look at some of the software available and the prices. So Windows versions can get pretty pricey too, especially for the oldest versions. Now this is, I think, a very competitive price for a complete sealed copy of Windows 3.11. You get the disks and the certificate of authenticity with the manual. Very handy. Now you probably do need a working copy of DOS 622 or at least DOS 5 probably, to install version 3.11. Windows 95 is where the prices start to really jump up. Finding a retail box copy of Windows 95 non-upgrade edition can get pretty pricey. You may be able to find it for less, but you're getting an OEM version usually. 152 is a little high, but this is an upgrade version actually. Wow. I was looking for a full version. I guess I'm not finding it here. So you do need Windows 3.11 installed in order to run the upgrade, or at least the certificate of authenticity with the license key. Windows 95 second edition. This is also an upgrade edition. $89 you can see. Now OEM versions, as I said, you can find for less. But if you're looking for the complete box, these are some of the prices you're going to start seeing. Now, this price on this product, this person's dreaming. It's not sealed, it's not complete, or if it is, they're not saying it. It's version 3.5 of Windows NT, not 3.51. 3.51 is a bug fix version of 3.5. It also includes the, I think, the first and maybe only edition of Windows NT 3.51 to include PowerPC support. It did include Alpha support and x86. And it might have, no, I don't think it was Spark capable. Now here's someone selling a single disk of version NT351. Also, at this price, $175, ridiculous. Get in touch with me. I will find a more suitable copy for you. Here's a complete set of an OEM release of Windows NT 351, branded by Digital, but you could probably install this on any x86 compatible machine. Still, the price, kind of outrageous. Now, when you get to Windows NT 4, you can easily find box copies well under $100. Sometimes you can find them for a little less, but this isn't too bad. And NT4 has the Windows 95 interface. It's still very old by today's standards, and the hardware you can run it on is vintage from 95 to about 99. After that, the hardware starts to get a little too new for this version of NT. But it's still possible. You just have to realize that things like USB support don't really exist in NT4. NT4 was developed sort of as a rush job, I believe. It was NT351 with the Windows 95 interface tacked onto it. And you can still see some of that Windows NT 351 heritage in NT4. But if you're a collector, this isn't a bad price for a sealed copy of NT 4.0. Here's a copy, a used copy, open copy of Windows 2000 Professional. And if it's really in like new condition, this is a steal. You don't see non-upgrade editions, non-OEM editions of Windows 2000 come up too often. The box looks a little beaten up, but not too bad. The boot disk's there, the CD's there. Yeah, so if you're looking for a nice copy of Windows 2000 Pro. This is a nice copy, and it's at a great price. Now, the last Windows product I'll do, because it's now classic, I guess, is Windows XP. Now, this is one of the only copies I've ever seen of a full version of XP, new in the box, sealed, retail version of XP Professional, or XP Home for that matter. So $125, because of the rarity, I'd say isn't a bad price, but it's really only for a collector at this point. But you don't see new in the box retail versions of XP come along, you know, with any regularity. Pretty rare. A lot of OEM copies out there all the time for a lot less. So it really depends. If you just want it as a functional copy, look for an OEM version. If you're a collector, this isn't a bad price, but it's still, I'm not going to jump at it. I don't want to spend the money on something that's going to sit in a box on a shelf in my closet. If it were $25, I'd be buying it in a minute. But $125, no. So, there you have it, folks. If I could stress anything more than anything else, it's do some research if you're not a geek and you haven't been following this stuff for 30 years already. This is only a small, smattering of what's available out there. Although the older stuff is getting harder and harder to find, the prices are creeping up and up. So, and you really do need to have some knowledge of the detail of the development of where certain versions fall in order to not get ripped off. And that was most readily demoed by the difference between this sale and that sale. So I'm glad I was able to find an example of what not to buy and what is ridiculously priced over what to buy, and at a great price. So we'll end it on this screen because that's my collection, or part of it. So I hope you enjoyed this video. It might have gone a little longer than I expected. I'm a little long-winded, and sometimes I talk kind of slow. Speed me up if you want. Get through the video in half the time. That's up to you. Hope you enjoyed it. Take care, and if you start collecting and you have any questions, feel free to ask in the comments. I'll try to answer as best I can. I've been doing this since the early 90s. So, and I'm sorry I didn't cover any Mac stuff, but I'm not really up on Mac history after System 7.1. I know a little bit about System 6, a little bit about System 7, nothing about System 8 and 9, never really used them. And then OS 10 from Mac OS 10, no use of that. So I'm not a good person for Mac info. Everything else, hopefully I can give you a little bit of a hand. And take care. You'll see me in another video, folks. Bye-bye.